So we would like to now commence today's session for the 56th Tokyo International Cross-Cultural Seminar. So today, this is an opportunity to learn about Japan's beautiful calligraphy. Thank you very much for participating. So just before commencing, there are a few pieces of housekeeping to share. So this international seminar will be in Japanese and English and distributed on the YouTube channel. The English channel is TIEC&HIH channel, while the Japanese channel is TIEC&HIH channel 2. Also, please refrain from recording the sound or the images of this video. So this live distributed lecture will be archived in future and can be seen at a future date. The 56th Tokyo International Cross-Cultural Seminar, the theme on this occasion is Japanese calligraphy or Kana Shodo. Calligraphy is a very traditional culture that's very close to us and has continued to delight people over the centuries. Today, we will be learning about the history and culture of this Japanese culture of calligraphy that is in pursuit of the beauty of letters. So first of all, we would like to welcome the Executive Director, Mr. Maruyama Keiji of the Student Exchange Department for some opening remarks. Mr. Maruyama, please. Hello, everybody. My name is Maruyama from the Student Exchange Department. Thank you very much today for your attendance in today's International Exchange Cross-Cultural Seminar. The Cross-Cultural Seminar involves inviting experts active on the front line of Japanese various fields. And by hearing their lecture, we can deepen multifaceted interest in towards Japan. Up until now, we would have held this in person, meaning that most of the participants would be the residents of this center. However, during the pandemic, we have held this online to prevent infection, which has meant that many people outside of this center can also participate. So the 56th is going to be on Japanese calligraphy. So this is referring to the calligraphy of Japanese kana, Japanese unique kana, but it's not all hiragana, but also includes what's called manyogana and sogana, and also those that mix kanji and kana. All of these are included in Japanese Kana Shodo. So today in order to learn deeply about this Japanese calligraphy, we are very lucky to be welcoming Mr. Atsuhito Takagi, the director of the Calligraphy Research Institute at Daito Bunka University, to hold today's lecture. Everyone who is participating today, we hope that you can develop your knowledge from various points of view regarding calligraphy and also take a brush in your hand and try out Kana calligraphy yourself in the second half of the session. I do very much hope that this is a fruitful session for all of you, and thank you again for your participation. Thank you. We would now like to go into today's lecture, and today we are welcoming Mr. Atsuhito Takagi. And Mr. Takagi is active at the forefront of Japanese calligraphy. He is the director of the Calligraphy Research Institute at Daito Bunka University, and so we're going to hand over now to Mr. Takagi for today's lecture. Hello, everybody. I'm Takagi, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm usually a teacher at Daito Bunka University, and today I'm delighted to share with foreign students on this occasion. I'm very honored to be here today. Thank you. So, Shodo, Japanese calligraphy, a lot of people don't see it in their daily lives, but when we think about writing letters and we talk about the roots of writing letters in Japan, we look back to the Chinese letters that came into Japan since centuries ago. These letters contain aesthetic beauty. They are aesthetically appealing, and they have several similarities. So I'm going to be talking about Kana today, but historically, Kana Shodo goes back to the Heian period, and so it was very much prominent during the second part of the Heian period, where it rose to prominence. So, it's a very prominent part of Japanese aesthetical culture, and it has remained up until the present day, and it remains at the very peak of Japanese aesthetic beauty. And so people have continued to try and write better calligraphy than their ancestors over the years. And so people have continued to challenge writing even more beautiful letters as the years and the centuries have gone on. So regarding Japanese calligraphy, one issue for us is when we come to making new works, new creations, but the next generation, how do we really pass on this aesthetic beauty to the next generation and to foster the next generation of calligraphers? That's a very important mission for us at Daito Bunka University. So, I am a professor at Daito Bunka University. We have in the year 2000, we had Japan's first calligraphy research department. So we're 23 years old now, and we have students where we teach calligraphy, but also general members of society. We would like to promote and develop Japanese calligraphy for people outside of the university as well. So we have the Calligraphy Research Institute as a related organization which allows general population to take classes in calligraphy, even if they're not a student. So as we foster the next generation of youngsters for Japanese calligraphy, I would like to just talk a little bit about the activities for Japanese calligraphy in our research institute. So you need some specialist information, as with any academic domain. And at Daito Bunka University, we have the scholarship of calligraphy and the actual practice of calligraphy. We want students to learn both the theory and the practice of Japanese calligraphy. So we have various classes for first years up to fourth years. There might be about 60 people in each year. So we are now providing, classes to students in every academic year. And for some of them, they may have, when they were children, sometimes come into contact with Shodo. But once they get to university, most students at university will have become interested in their teachers at high school. So they would have encountered calligraphy through their teachers in high school, and then that is where their interest in calligraphy came from. And for 4 years, they create works with calligraphy. They learn about the history of calligraphy and various topics. And so they do the theory and practice and study calligraphy. But 4 years it seems long, but it's actually very short. And so when we're studying calligraphy, it's a lifetime work. You study your whole life. And young people, the kind of works that they create, and the elderly generation, people of my generation, people older than me, some of them are 99. The oldest teacher is 99 years old at the moment, and has almost 100 years of experience as a calligrapher. But this teacher still comes up with the most novel and fresh calligraphy. So that's very interesting, isn't it? That such an old person, it needs something more than just physical strength with calligraphy. You require the ability to continue writing calligraphy throughout your life is a very great thing.
So at university, you will learn for 4 years, or you may go to master's, postgrads, and PhD. Some decides to continue the education, but majority of students go after graduating school. There were not too many businesses with calligraphies, but many of my students go to become a teacher in local communities that they are coming from while practicing with the Shodo calligraphy. Most of my students are like that. At our Calligraphy Research Institute, we have a textbook where we have good demonstration samples of calligraphies. Many of the textbooks, if you are a student of calligraphy when you are young, there are different DUNS classes, right? You are class number 3, number 4, number 1. This might be a unique approach in Japan, I believe, but there are certain challenges being given every month, and you practice those challenges, and you make official submission. And then if you submit, your submissions get evaluated. Your class may go up. Your class may not go up, stay the same. But if you do better, you go up. If you're lazy, you stay the same. And that was kind of encouraging challenges, which drives many people to continue this field. Many of you, or if you're Japanese, many of you actually went to learn calligraphy when you were kids. But that practice is having a brush in your hand, right? Because the letters written with the brush come with the raw intensity. It's quite different from ballpoint pen rendering or writings, because it's very mysterious, because same letters might be rendered by 5 people, and the characters of those letters are looking very different from one person to another. In the later section, we'll have you play with brush during the workshop. It's very different from one person to another, which makes me very excited about. So I am very excited about later section with you. Now, we are also editing textbooks, and we are inviting calligraphers. We want to encourage them. We want to have more fun to many of the participants. That's one practice we do at our institute. The other one is that we have a calligraphy conference where many of people submit with their works, and we will assess and validate and they recognize the best and our excellent calligraphic work. And so at the institute, we run such a project while giving opportunities for people to learn, aside from us teaching former students at our college. But like I've been saying, Kana Shodo is one of the styles related with the Japanese calligraphy. But if you stop and think back, let's try to pause and start thinking about how Japanese letters come from, because we have kana, katakana, hiragana. We sometimes use katakana, right? We also have Chinese character or kanji. We have multiple different styles in constructing the writings. In that sense, our language, especially in a written form, is very delicate, very sensitive. I'm sure you have done this before. Writing the same word with katakana, sometimes you switch to hiragana, sometimes you use kanji for that, and the perception about that word can completely transform. Because so presenting one phrase can be very sensitively can be made different. and our language is. But if you think about it, Japan originally didn't have our own unique letter system to make a written format about our language, because having a writing makes a big difference in terms of whether you can record something or not. Having access to letters, writings is so important, and many examples prove that. Japan didn't have a writing system, but how Japan originally didn't have the writing system. How did we acquire that technology? Let's think about it, because you don't think about that on a daily basis. In a simple way, I can describe like this. In Japan, kanji, right? Kanji has onyomi and kunyomi, phonetic, and with context. So onyomi, what it is basically kanji, and the sound from China when we import it from China. Let me take some example to just demonstrate that part with you. So let's say sakura, or cherry blossom that you see in spring, in April. So sakura, if we want to write sakura, so how did they want to describe sakura in writing before? So there were 3 letters here that I've just written. And the people back then, kanji, Chinese characters get imported. People who has exposure to Chinese character, Japanese people, right? Look at those letters. So Chinese pronounce it as if it's close to sa in Japanese for Japanese ears. This also sounded like sa. This also sounded like sa. So the word left, as in left and right, left also sounded like sa. So sakura, give you another example. So these letters, no, there's another one. So these sounded like ku. So for Japanese ears, so these are the phonetic sound that Japanese will pick up in their own ears. So this is close to some phonetic description. Like this is examples for ra. So these also sounded like very close to ra sound in Japanese. So if they want to describe or write sakura, this sa and ku and ra, if you write them in this series, this is presented as sakura. So if somebody in Japan wanted to record sakura, then sa, ku, and ra. And that is the way Japanese sakura will be kept as a record. And they realized they could do such a thing. And so it used to be one character with one sound using Chinese character. Initially, they came from Chinese practice. So Ichigo Jinren, it's a historical literature. Maybe they wanted to describe a Japanese specific name, for example, Himiko as a princess back then. And so Chinese people have made a record of Japanese names like that. And it came to Korean Peninsula and came to Japan. And Japanese people back then, when they wanted to make a record of something, they started to choose one Chinese character representing one Japanese sound. That kind of recording of the literature had started. One of the recorded letters looks like this. If you go to Horyuji Temple, and there were wood architectural structure, have some of the scribbles And if you go to so this sounds like naniwazu. So this is basically, it says Kokinshu's poem line. There's that one poem which talks about this. This is na, ni, ha, tsu, ni. And this is a way for them to make a record of a part of the poem in Kokinshu in the architectural structure.
So first of all, you can see this is kana. Each one has a sound. Each letter has a sound. But the actual font of these are kanji, Chinese kanji in terms of their form. But the Chinese, they're using the Chinese reading, and kana are then these. Each one has a sound. Each letter has one sound. So kana are, there are lots of different types of kana, but there are various ways of calling various names for kana. But separate to those, as how kanji are used, when one letter has one sound, that's how kana came to be used in Japan. So they were often classified. So this is one kind of kana here. And then in the Nara era, the Nara period, you can see that each character had one sound attached to it. But after that, things began to change a bit. And, the actual letters start to become condensed and to become smaller and less complicated. So for the sakura that I just showed you just now, let's take another look at that. So let's have this means left now, but it's sa, ku, and then ra. So then sa then started to transform into something like this. Ku started to look like this, and ra started to be rendered like this. And after that, then it became sa, then it became ku, and then it became ra. So you can see the progression of how they sort of become less complicated and sort of develop into hiragana. So the kanji have been kind of shortened and shortened down into hiragana. So that started at the end of the Nara period and into the Heian period. It accelerated, and so then we saw the development of what we call hiragana now. So these were established in the Nara Heian period. And so originally these kanji had come from China. We've borrowed those kanji from China, and then those Chinese characters have been simplified and shortened and transformed into hiragana. And so by the time of the end of the Heian period, they had been completely reborn into this hiragana form. So Kana Japanese calligraphy was now very lively using these hiragana. And Kana Shodo Japanese calligraphy, the beauty of it is, if we go back to the Heian period, if we think of the Heian period, then, from the Nara period into the early Heian period, Japan was, basing the country on China. Everything was modeled on China. They sent people to China to learn from this country with a bigger culture next door, to learn all about their various knowledge, academic knowledge, and then to bring that back to Japan, and then to create the country of Japan. So they wanted to reference China for culture, for all sorts of aspects of how to create the country. So that went on for sort of, several hundred years, people going to China to learn. But different to now, China back then, it was an official mission. They were sent, these were the top people, dispatched from Japan to China to learn, accumulate knowledge, bring it back to Japan to build the nation of Japan. And so for the Nara and Heian period, the officials, what they really wanted, they needed to be able to speak Chinese. So they needed to be able to do exchange with the East Asian continent. So they would have to write official documents in Japanese kanji. If there were songs, or if they were, if they had parties as well, with it was a very high status matter to know Chinese, to be able to read and write in Chinese. So the languages and culture of China were extremely important to Japanese people at the time, especially officials. So as time went on, and these, China also had its own sort of learning from China. Really there was. Japan would send these scholars to China to learn and then wait for them. But then they started to think that there was no need to send people anymore to China, so there was a certain event when one of the scholars, there was some for about 840 years or so, they had carried on this practice of learning from China. But after that, they said, well, now we have everything we need. We're just going to sort of revise what we have in Japan. So this is a new era. So there are obviously sort of flows and processes to these. But the Japanese, one of the things was to edit all of the songs and poems of Japan. So a man at the time was appointed, a man called Tsuruki was appointed to edit and read all of the songs and poems that had been written in kana. So this was to compile and edit, a collection of songs and poems by the Emperor of Japan. That was a big mission. They wanted people to record their songs. They wanted their songs and poems to be historically, retained. So the Kokin Wakashu, which was a collection of Japanese songs, that was also referenced on the Manyoshu, another Japanese classic book of poems. But this big job was to edit and compile these songs and poems. And I think there were sort of 1,200 songs or so. There were poems that were read at home. Everybody at home would read poems or recite poems and songs. That was a historical tradition. So if you go to different houses, that house would, you would read the poems or songs of that house and pick up, elements that you liked from those poems and songs. So that was the process that started collecting and compiling all of these songs and poems. So this was about the beginning of the 10th century, but, it's reciting poems. It was one thing that the imperial family did from the Nara period. But once we get into the Heian period, then the aristocrats are now powerful. And the like Fujiwara no Michinaga, for example, when we come into his era, people want to retain their power. They want to hold on to their power, the same as people today. But how did they consolidate their power, their authority? Well, one way was they would try to get their daughters, that they thought their daughter should be educated so that she could be proffered to the aristocrats. So Fujiwara had Murasaki Shikibu, a very famous poet, as a home teacher, and Murasaki Shikibu, who wrote The Tale of Genji. At that time, there were, people in their teens would go and marry into the imperial family. They would go and marry into the imperial family while they're still teenagers. So one of their education, they had to be able to recite poetry and songs. So when these aristocrats wanted to correspond with the royal family, they wouldn't look each other directly in the face. That was not culturally appropriate. So you would maybe sing or recite a song to recite a poem to the counterpart and wait for their reply. So it was like a back and forth of poems or songs. So you would get this nice. If the song or the poem was nice, then you might feel like going and meeting that person. So this was, people wanted their daughters to memorize all of these poems in the Koki Wakashu. Then they would be able to read and recite poems. They would then, the powerful aristocrats would want to, so they would educate their daughters to be very well versed in these songs and poems. And the Kokin Wakashu, they wanted it to be a bestseller book. So this man, Kino Tsurayuki, who was appointed to edit this, when he did it, he had one set of poems that he gave, and then he had another one which only had 3 sections to it. And then the aristocrats would ask for a set of these poems to have in their house.
And during the Heian period, in the mid to late, so the copy of Kokin Wakashu was the most important gift that anybody can give. You cannot really have any number to describe into today's monetary value. So one roll is about 1 to 20 meters. So we have 20 of them. So somewhere between 80 meters, 100 meters worth of paper needs to be arranged. That paper, dry paper, was imported back then from China. And those needs to be accessed. And we have to outsource that to be written by professional writers, documentary. And the remaining copies are the actual copy of Kokin Wakashu, which is also available physically if you want to look at it, even in a modern age like today. So let me just give you another example. So this is one of the best texts for practicing kana. So koyagire is one type of a copy of Kokin Wakashu. So this is the very beginning of a Kokin Wakashu, the collection of poem. So it says Kokin Wakashu, roll number 1, Song of Spring, number 1. So Kino Tsurayuki, he was the very excellent, highly skilled editor. So he would ask different families to be presented with the copies that they have. And so he decided to start this document with the spring. So we have Song of Spring first. We have Song of Spring 2 and 3. And then you will migrate to summer. So that he has arranged the order of poems, which are provided from different families, different households, and put them in order of that season. And so here's a block with the certain author with the multiple poems from several different people. So these poems are not written by the same person, but arranged not by person or the author, arranged in a series of season. So you will first exposed about the experience of spring. It will change to early summer, to midsummer, and then to autumn, to winter. Japanese seasons are described. So rather than simply randomly putting the poems together in random order, this is arranged with the seasonal sequence. This itself is wonderful. This is the chapter for spring, but there is a chapter for love, poem. Of admiration for somebody who this person has never met before. And with the communication exchanges poems, they will start to know each other. And the very last piece of that section is somebody being dumped. So if for my students, including somebody from abroad, and the translated version is just fine, but Japanese version is very interesting. And more than 1,000 years ago, 1995. So yeah, 1,100 years ago, that's when this was written. But the sentiment and experiencing the feeling about these seasons are exactly very relevant to how we feel about seasons. A lot of things is very relevant and shares the same sentiment about it, which is a very positive surprise about it. Koyagire version. Now, Koyagire is the oldest physically available version that is still remaining today. But before that, there were the copy from the team that first editor is no longer gone. So this version is the oldest version that has physically still be here. But this is the copies version with 3 editors, by the way. And I'll come back to this point later. But the way that they were playing with ink is very creative because you see the dark trace of ink when the brush started off, and then it becomes thinner and thinner. It's called mizukuki. So there was a very dry ink where the punctuation of ink is very strong while it becomes weaker and weaker, which is beautiful itself because the way ink is being played with this document is something that many people appreciate and I highly evaluate for Koyagiri version. So Koyagiri version, which is being written by three artists. And so these 3 versions of Koyagire have many traces of modern-day hiragana. So these are simplified version of kanji. The simplification went on throughout the process, and this is most simplified versions are still remaining today in the form of hiragana today. So this is like a recorded evidence is of how Japanese hiragana has been generated at its inception. And so the copies of Kokin Wakashu was a very big hit back then. Many copies being made. So we have a partial copies because the different artists have different styles. If you just through this, at least there are 36 artists because the way the letters are rendered are different. 36 very different styles. So this is small copy. But this is the smallest, most compact one written in Heian period. Oamgire is what this version is called. It's the same poem collection, but this version, Koyagire version, is very, very different, very edgy. The brush were being used with, you can almost see the trace of power when the brush is being applied to the paper. And so back in Heian period, maybe this is better example. There's a Seishon Shikishi is that type of a paper. Yeah, you might wanna, let's pick this one. So again, it's the same collection of the poems, but copies of the poems were being made to make it friendly for reader of a copy. And the first section of the second section of the poems are separated with different paper. And this is again copy for Kokin Wakashu. And so 4 seasons, spring and summer, autumn. Chapter with 4 seasons are only written on this version. And there may be back in history, might be a copy of this approach. So this is very different from two poem line structures. So full lines for one poem with the starting at the top. Next line is slightly lower. So you see like up and down physically. So this copy is showing different appeal to the user of such document. There are many different artistic approaches during Heian period, one after another. But when we come to Kamakura period, the aristocrats are no longer as powerful as society, cultures get shifted. And so trying to create a new artistic style is not really becomes popular. It lost popularity. And if you think about it, looking back even from today's perspective, nothing was as excellent as back in Heian period, as many argues that's the case.
There's another kind of kana called Saigyo Kei. And I think when you look at this for the first time, it looks lots of small fish swimming around. That's what some people feel when they see this first. But you can see that it's a very different arrangement of the letters. But you can see Saigyo has So the people who used to recite poetry in groups, they would have groups for reciting poetry or singing these songs. So they would make a copy of these, and then you would then start to see copies of the original letters. And so in the Heian period, as the time went on, some different beauty, a different. I like these, but this sort of new way of style started to develop in the Heian period, with which looked like these. And so, going back to the Kokin Wakashu collection of poems, there were lots of copies of these. When people started to write copies of these collections of poems, there were various expressions that came out. So I spoke about sakura just now, and how that came from the original Chinese characters and then became simplified. So give me another example. You can write it also in this other style. So this is sa and then ku, and then it could be like sakura. But then you can actually join them up like this in a cursive style. Okay, so that's also sakura. Or you could change the actual letters themselves. So you could change the combination. So you could use perhaps this sa and this ku and this ra. So you could have this combination. Let's write it in the simplified version. So that's your sa, and then your ku is here, and then your ra is here. So that's another possible way of writing sakura. So on the left-hand side here, that's sakura. We call this the mother of the original kanji, the mother, as it were. But then if we write it using the original letters, in this way, when we made copies of the kokinshu, people made copies of the kokinshu, what combination of letters would be the most most appealing, that was left up to the writer to decide. And so there were all sorts of different expressions possible, depending on the writer, which combination they used. So there's lots of different ways to generate this sort of aesthetic beauty through the possibilities were open to the writer to really come up with something beautiful. So if you look at different copies, you can say, I think they were aiming for this. I think they were trying to get this effect. This is evident when you look at these various copies of the Kokin cooking wakashu. And so it's a bit like a puzzle as well in one aspect. So when you're trying to make a copy of a poem, for example, there are very different ways, very different combinations. The kanji, you can also add in kanji as well. So as an example, if we were going to write sakurabana, meaning sakura flower, cherry blossom flower, the simplest way we could just have the hiragana sa and then ku and then ra, and then we would have the hana in kanji, the flower in kanji at the end, in Chinese kanji. If we wanted to write it in complicated kanji, we could start off with sa, ku, and then we could have ra from Rashomon, and then hana we might write in kana at the end, for example. So there's another way of doing it. Or we could use a different character for sa. We could have a different ku and a different ra. That's also sakura. That's all joined up. Then we could have depending on what type of flower we want to write here, we might leave a space in between the kanji and the kana. So, which letters are used, it really depends how you select the letters. It's down to the writer, or do you link them up, or do you separate them? If you separate them and leave a gap in between, then you might leave a little pause in between, and that also adds an interesting element. It's all free for the writer to decide how to manifest these letters, how to combine them, and how to, really create something original and beautiful, and it's unique. So that's the practice that became common among people writing poetry or copies of poetry. So in the Heian period, there were lots of writers all doing different types of writing. It was a real outpouring of creativity and in that period. And so the beauty of kana, of calligraphy, it's like a game. It's like a puzzle, as I said. Within the rules, you create something within a set of rules, and you might have a thick line or a thin line. You might have. When we do the workshop, I will go into you. I would like you to check this out, but depending whether you use ink or not, it completely changes the appearance. Whether you use a thick line or a thin line, it completely changes the way that you see the letters. And also, the paper that you use to write them on also very much changes the feeling as well. So the beauty of kana characters, one element of these is, is the paper and the brush as well. So, we might have the original koyagire, the ones that I showed you, these really old. These are called koyagire. These from about 15th century, but that they used a certain type of paper. It's just a very normal paper with nothing special about it. But as the time changes, that we get all sorts of new elements added into the paper. It gets to more gorgeous. The paper became more and more splendid. I haven't got it here today, but there's one particular work where each page has different paper using different types, very extravagant luxury paper. So, once this era comes along, it's just the lines of the letters start to become less of a focus, but the paper starts to become a big focus. When the paper is one thing that people really enjoy focusing on, not just the letters, but the actual paper as well. And so with Kokinshu poems, as I was describing with the Kokinshu poems, there were various writers doing various methods. Some of them are, pressing hard. Some are very delicate. Some are very broad strokes. Some are very look like something that looks almost like a sculpture, like a very, all sorts of different approaches. to writing kana. How should I say? It almost hurts the eyes to look at it. There's all sorts of expressions became prominent among the different writers, and each one had their own difference, their own, idiosyncratic style, which is very interesting to look at different writers and the different styles. And when people first discover kana, I want to obviously them to look at the real thing, the genuine article. Things from today, from the current, people, my contemporaries, we are writing kana, right, and creations ourselves. But during the Heian period, though, unless it's harder to make an impact on people these days compared to the Heian period. So, sometimes people try to make them look rather gorgeous to surpass the former excellence of the old calligraphers. But, I think in the National Museum, we could go to the National Museum and look at the permanent exhibits there, which shows you the really old calligraphers. And because these are really worth seeing, and seeing the original calligraphers' works. That's something that people should do. Yes, when you want to, when you look at it, something good comes straight into you, doesn't it? But that's not always the case. It's when you have the person looking at the calligraphy need to kind of prepare mentally for how to look at it and how to intake it. I think that's particularly strong with Western, with Eastern art, and for the Kokin Wakashu, the Kokin Wakashu in Japanese, I think it has been translated into English. So you could read the Kokin Wakashu's translation in English, and 1,000 years ago, try and sense the same sensations, the same feelings that people had 1,000 years ago. It's very surprising that you can read this poetry and experience the same emotions that people did 1,000 years ago.
And read them and repeat reading them, and I think you will start to get the beauty of it gradually. If that happens, isn't it so wonderful? Now, calligraphy, people been using letters or the characters with hand, but now rarely people write letters with hands, because computer, and then not too many people write something with brush, unless you are going to a wedding or somebody's funeral. But there's something interesting about documenting something with your own hands. Making copy of wonderful literature is another good example. Because experience is different from writing with brush versus ballpoint pen. And because you feel more connected, and I think that works, makes it very... I find that experience very cozy. Now, I mostly spend most of my time talking about kokinshu, but copying something, right? You will do shakyo, which is making a copy of religious Buddhist texture. Which is one of the practices in Buddhism, but it doesn't have to be that. Copying wonderful literature like Kokinshu itself is a very beautiful experience. That's why I recommend this to many people. Now, students who love shodo, who love calligraphy, especially if I look back at myself, did I love Japanese calligraphy before I get into this field? I was a big fan. No, I was not. I had this father who is a calligrapher. This father, now after this session, during the workshop, I have this one model sample. And a very small work. Hebi Gogo is the person who was the teacher to him, and he was getting trained by him. I was and I just went along with my dad, and I saw this master making this calligraphic work, and I didn't understand why. But this master was putting the brush. It sounds like this brush was illuminating, because it's not as simple as copying something, because characters also has this power. And I have experienced this multiple times. I was so impressed with calligraphy, and that's how I developed my interest in this field. So I often tell my students and ask questions about why they decided to go to calligraphy. And the students nowadays, actually had a passion about calligraphy. Unlike myself, I'm bashful about that. But loving, if you love something, it will sustain, right? Because you are losing something if you are hating something, right? Because let's say students, this person is 20 years old, she will have 70 years for his or her life. And if you love something, you can go along with this for the next 70 years. Sometimes you create work, some other times you will not create anything, but not hating it. Work hard to remain loving something is something that I tell my students often. Now, if you become as old as I am, looking back at my old works, and there are some more single character that can make me happy, and so the the character's letters does actually have power. Like if you're interested in rendering poem, you might, if you don't have energy to write something, just reading or just observing that itself is great as an experience itself, because find a favorite word, find a wonderful style of the character you find, and write your name with hiragana. And you pick up some cool looking hiragana, cut it and paste it itself. Anyway, if you get to experience together with letters, that will be very wonderful. So I spent some time talking about this, and I demonstrated toward the end while explaining something. I think with that demonstration, I hope you get some insights, because only talking about this will be very difficult to communicate this idea. So I decided to demonstrate something with the different approach, like chirashigaki style and others. Some may look better. And later, I'd like to work together in a working session. And I went off randomly, and I went tangent a few times. But I hope you take away that Japanese kana was coming from Chinese character. It was a phonetic sound, a sound representation of how Chinese character sounded. It was back in Heian period. So Kaisho style and Gyosho style, Chinese character styles were being simplified all the way down to kana style, Japanese kana. And that was back in mid 11th century, where something similar to modern day kana was being incepted. So during the Meiji period, 33 years after the Meiji Emperor took the Meiji era started, and so they wanted to create back then the textbook, official textbook for old schools, and they pick up. They officially decided during the time when the official textbook was being made, this word was chosen as the official sa. Not this one, not this one. There were many different versions of ku, but the education ministry decided to use ku as this is. La was chosen like this. Before Meiji 33, before 33 years, 30 of Meiji, there were multiple different versions, but they structurally decided to use only one character for one. And they will use hentai kana back then, this version. And others were called hentai kana, and nobody will get exposed to those different versions in their daily lives. If you go to soba restaurant, you may be able to find different versions, but the only time that you see them is the work of Kana Shodo. We sometimes use like those non-official versions too, but if you want to communicate to the people in the modern era, you will never be have a impact or influence something with the our colleagues in modern age, but to make it beautiful looking or cool looking, it becomes more complicated because you have less and less choice if you want to make sense out of what's written, which is sometimes frustrating. But even that, I'd like to take that challenge, continue to want to practice this. But now the only one character for one sound, but kana was being, but the thing is, you can put different combination of different styles in Kana Shodo. I'd like to finish talking about this to finish the first section.
So thank you very much for watching today's lecture. And we would be delighted if you could fill out a questionnaire survey. The URL for the survey is in the description box. And so we look forward to your responses, and they will be used for our future cultural seminars in terms of how we run them and the themes that we choose. And so these cross-cultural seminars online can be viewed on YouTube from the past, so please check them out. And this is we've had 3 cross-cultural seminars, and each of them have different genres, and we bring in experts to illuminate us with very interesting content. For each theme, we look at the symbolic culture of Japan in order to give enjoyable experiences to gain multilateral knowledge of Japan. We very much look forward to your cooperation and future attendance. The cross-cultural seminars and exchange, everyone who we look forward to your participation in our future seminars and to broadening your interest and knowledge in Japan. So please do look at JASO's homepage for more information. And that is all for today. Thank you very much for your participation. We look forward to welcoming you next time.